I want you to do something right now, and I'm going to ask you to actually do it. Not just listen to me describe doing it, but actually pause for a second and do it. Answer this question as fast as you can. First thing that comes up: who are you? What came up? What was the first thing? Was it a job? Your title? Something you do? I'm a business owner. I'm in sales. I work in construction. Was it a relationship? I'm a father. I'm a husband. Was it something you've been through? I'm someone who's been knocked down a few times. I'm someone who's building back. Or, and this is the one I want you to stay with if it's true. Did you get something a little blurry? A little hard to pin down? Did you find yourself reaching for an answer and not quite being able to hold on? The one that felt completely accurate? Because here's what I've noticed, and I'm not talking about people who are falling apart. I'm talking about thoughtful, self aware people who read, who reflect, who care about who they are and what they are doing and where they are going to. A lot of these people, when they sit quietly with that question, who are you, genuinely struggle to answer it in a way that feels true. Not because they are lost, not because something's wrong with them, but because somewhere in the business of building a life, building a career, building a family, building a version of themselves that functions in the world, they stop checking in with the actual person underneath all of it. And the answer they give, when they give one, is almost always a description of what they do, or who they do to other people, or what they have been building, what they achieved, what they survived. These are all real things. Those things matter, but none of them are you. Not fully. Not at the level I'm talking about. This video is about that, about identity, what it actually is, how it gets built, how it gets lost, and how you find your way back to something that actually feels like it's yours, not borrowed, not inherited, not assembled, for someone else's benefit, for your benefit. If you have ever looked in the mirror and felt like you were looking at someone you used to know better, this video is for you. Stay with me. Let me start with something that I think is genuinely underappreciated, which is how rarely men ask themselves the real version of the identity question. There are surface versions of it. People ask themselves, am I happy? Am I successful? Am I where I thought I'd be? Those are real questions and they matter. But the deeper version, who am I? Actually, underneath all of these, most men don't go there. And it's not because they are shallow or incurious. It is because the question is threatening in a specific way that most other questions aren't. Because most questions, when you answer them honestly, they give you a problem you can work on. I'm not fit enough. Okay, I can address that. Not making enough money. Okay, I can do that. Not spending enough time with my family. I can give more time to my family. These problems have obvious action steps. They have trajectories. You can see the path from here to the better version. But who am I? When you sit with that honesty, the honest answer is sometimes I'm not sure. That is a different kind of uncomfortable because there is no obvious action step for not knowing who you are. There is no clear path from I don't know who I am to now I do. It's murky, it's slow, and it requires looking at things that most of us have been quietly avoiding for years. So we don't ask the question, we stay busy, we stay focused on the external things, the metrics, the roles we have, the performance we play in the society and in our houses. And the question sits in the background unanswered, gets louder until something forces it forward. And it usually does eventually. A loss, a transition, a moment of hitting a wall that you can't push through with more effort, something that strips enough of the external scaffolding away that the question stops being ignorable. That moment, as destabilizing as it feels, is actually one of the most important moments in a man's life because it's a moment when the real work becomes possible. I'm not going to wait for that moment to force the question for you. I'm asking it now, in a context where you can actually think about it rather than reacting to a crisis. Who are you? Not what you do, not what you have built, not what role do you play, but who are you? Keep that question open. We are going to spend the next hour answering it properly. Nobody gives you an identity. Nobody sits you down at some point and says, here's who you are, here's what you value, here's how you're going to move through the world. It doesn't work like that. Identity gets built slowly, mostly unconsciously, mostly in response to the environment around you. And understanding how it gets built is important because once you see the construction process, you can see where it went wrong and you can see how to rebuild it differently. It starts before you can even articulate it. When you are young, very young, you're getting constant feedback from the world around you, from your parents, from your siblings, from your teachers, from your peers. And that feedback teaches you here is what gets rewarded, here is what gets punished, here is what makes you safe, here is what makes you unsafe. And you adopt. Because adaptation is survival. A child who doesn't learn what behavior keeps them loved and safe is a child in danger. So you learn. You become the version of yourself that the environment rewards. Some of that is genuine. Maybe you were actually curious and curiosity was rewarded. And now curiosity is a real part of who you are. Maybe you were actually funny and humor connected you to people, and that's genuinely yours. But some of it is performance, some of it is strategic adaptation. You become the responsible one because that's what was needed. You become the strong one because weakness wasn't acceptable. You become the achiever because achievement was the currency of love in the household. And you carry those adaptations forward. You stack more on top. The responsible kid becomes the reliable professional. The strong one becomes the man who never asks for help. The achiever becomes the man who measures his worth entirely by his output, layer by layer, year by year, decade by decade. And somewhere in the 30s and 40s, after enough layers have been added, after the structure has gotten tall enough, you stop building consciously and just live inside it. You inhabit the structure, you perform it without thinking, and it performs on your behalf in the world with a level of efficiency that makes questioning it feel unnecessary. It works. In a functional sense, it mostly works until it doesn't. And here's what I want you to really hear, because I think this is something most men don't fully appreciate until they are deep in the consequences of it. A significant portion of what you currently call your identity, the way you see yourself, the way you define yourself, the story you tell about yourself to the people who you built not by you but for you, or more precisely for the people and environment around you. It was built to earn love, to earn safety, to fit into what was expected from a man in your context, to match the image of the success that was held up as a target. And some of it became genuinely yours through repetition, through genuine development, through real lived experiences. But a lot of it still running as a borrowed code, software written by other people for other purposes, still executing in your operating system decades later. And the question, the one the most important, which men never ask until something forces them to, is which is which? What's actually mine? What am I carrying for someone else? That question is the beginning of the real work. I want to get specific now because your identity is borrowed in an interesting concept, but it's not useful on its own. What's useful is being able to look at the specific things you've been calling yourself and ask honestly, is this me or is this a role? And I want you to walk through four roles, four very common, very legitimate, very important roles that the men in midlife almost universally carry, and that almost universally gets confused for identity. These aren't bad roles. I want to be very clear about that. Every single one of these roles has a value. They matter. They contribute something real to your life and to the people around you. The problem isn't having them. The problem is when the role becomes the whole answer to the question, who are you? The problem is when the role and the person become indistinguishable because role changes, roles end. And if the role is the identity, when the role ends, so does the sense of self. The first role is of a provider, the one who runs deep in men, particularly men over 35, 40, 45. The man whose worth, not just his function, his worth as a human being is measured in what he delivers, what he earns, what he provides, what he makes possible for the people depending on him. And look, there's something genuinely noble about it. The drive to provide, to be dependable, to make things work, that's not small. That's built families and businesses and communities. But here's what happens when it becomes identity rather than a role. Your entire sense of self becomes contingent on your ability to deliver. When the income is good, you feel good about yourself. When the income drops, or the business hits a hard patch, or the career stalls, you don't just feel stressed about finances, you feel like you're failing as a person. Like you're failing, not your circumstances, you are failing. I've seen men lose a job or business, and within 6 months, they were not recognizable, depressed in ways they don't have language for, disconnected from relationships, going through the motions of life without any sense of being present in it. And people around them are confused because from the outside, the finance problem is measurable, it's manageable, it's hard, but things can be done. There are options, there are paths forward. But the financial problem isn't what broke them. What broke them is that they built their entire sense of who they were on their function as a provider. And when that function was disrupted, even temporarily, there were nothing left underneath. No separate sense of that existed independent of the role. The function was the identity. And when the function stumbled, the identity collapsed. Second role is of an achiever. This one is particularly common in men who have had some success. Men who have built things with targets, proven themselves time and again in any arena of the life. Men whose self-concept is heavily tied to their track record. And on the surface, this seems fine. Achievement is good. Having a track record matters. Knowing what you're capable of, that's useful. But the trap with the achiever identity is this. The achievements have to keep coming because the self-worth is tied to the output, not the person. And the moment the output slows, or worse, the moment you hit a goal and feel nothing, which happens more than anyone admits, the identity wobbles. I want to talk about that specific experience for a second. I think it's one of the most disorienting things that happen to high achieving men, and nobody talks about it honestly. You work towards something for months, maybe years. You get there, you hit the target, and in the moment of hitting it, instead of the expected feeling, satisfaction, completion, arrival, you feel empty. Or you feel it briefly and then it's gone. And you're already scanning for the next thing because you need the next thing to feel okay about it, to feel okay about yourself. That's not ingratitude. That's not a character flaw. That's what happens when your sense of self is entirely dependent on external markers. The marker gets a hit. The self doesn't feel permanently validated because the self doesn't actually work that way. So you run to the next achievement and the next. Not from the genuine ambition, from the need to keep the self concept intact. The motion becomes the medication. Business becomes the way you avoid sitting with the question underneath all the achieving, which is, who am I when I'm not achieving? The third role is the relationship role. The husband, the father, the son who holds the family together, the friend everyone calls when things go wrong. These are genuinely sacred roles, not being dismissive of them. Being a good father, a good husband, a reliable person in the lives of people you love, that matters. And it matters enormously. But there's a specific danger with this. These roles are relational. They exist in the context of other people, which means they are by definition outside your control to maintain indefinitely. Marriages end, not always through failure, sometimes through the natural conclusion that something ran its course, now it ends. Sometimes through genuinely nobody's fault. Children grow up, they become their own people, they leave. The role of active, present, needed father changes fundamentally. That's supposed to happen. But if fatherhood was your entire identity, when it shifts, you lose something you don't have language for. Parents die, and the son who held the family together suddenly has to answer the question, who am I? In the family structure that no longer exists in the same form. When the relationship that was the container for the identity changes or ends, the identity built inside it loses its foundation. And the men who experience this most acutely are the ones who gave most generosity, the ones who were the most devoted to the role, which means the men who loved most deeply often have the hardest time with the particular loss. There is something genuinely cruel about that, and it doesn't get named enough. The fourth role is of a struggler, and this is one most people don't see coming. Some men build their entire identity around the fact that they have been through something hard, the underdogs, the comeback story, the man who's been knocked down and got back up. And that story is real. Struggle was real. The resilience that came from it is real. I'm not minimizing any of it. But here's what happens over time. The struggle becomes a comfort zone. It becomes familiar. It becomes the frame through which everything gets interpreted. And at a certain point, the man who built his identity on the struggle starts unconsciously, gradually maintaining the struggle because the struggle is what he knows. Because leaving it would require building a new identity, and that new identity doesn't exist yet. He doesn't know who he is outside the struggle. He doesn't know how to introduce himself without reference for everything what he has been through. He doesn't know what he wants now, that he is not just surviving, he stays in it. Not out of weakness, out of very human need to know who he is. And the struggle is the only answer he has. I'm not pointing it at anyone. I've lived in this role for longer than I'd like to admit. The rebuilding narrative, the man working his way back, it became its own form of identity. And I had to eventually ask myself, am I actually building or am I just performing rebuilding? Am I moving towards something or am I comfortable in the present situation, in the story of moving forward towards something but not doing anything? Those are hard questions. They don't have comfortable answers. Check yourself against these four, genuinely. Not to judge yourself, to see yourself clearly. Because you can't rebuild what you can't see. Here's what I want to talk about now. The moment the role goes away, because most of the men watching this have either experienced this or are in the middle of it. And the experience itself is so specific, so disorienting, that I want to describe it as accurately as I can. Because if you've been through it, I want you to feel recognized. And if you're heading towards it, I want you to be prepared. The identity crisis, despite what movies and pop psychology suggests, doesn't usually announce itself with a dramatic moment. It doesn't arrive with a clear before and after. Most of the time, it seeps in. It starts as a low level feeling, something slightly off, a sense that the things you're doing, the role you're performing, the identity you are inhabiting doesn't quite fit the way it used to. Like wearing a suit that used to be comfortable and you're gradually changed shape. So it's slightly wrong in the ways that are hard to name. You're still doing everything that was supposed to be done. You're showing up, delivering, meeting expectations. But there is a quality of going through the motions that wasn't there before. A disconnection between the external performance and whatever is happening internally. You're executing the character, but you are no longer fully inside it. And then either gradually or certainly, the role itself changes or disappears. The job restructures, the marriage ends, kids leave. The business that you were building goes in a different direction than you imagined. Something external shifts in a way that makes the role you've been playing no longer available in the same form. And you're left standing there in the space where the role used to be, and it's empty. Now, I want you to describe what happens next, honestly, because I think the way most people describe this moment does it a disservice. The way it gets described in the inspirational context is this is your opportunity. This is where the real you emerges. This is the chrysalis moment. And that's true eventually. But that's not what it feels like in the first days and weeks and sometimes months. What it actually feels like is closer to nothing, a strange quiet, nothing. The structure that was organizing your days and your sense of self is gone. And in its absence, there isn't a rush of authentic self emerging. There is just space, quiet. And for men who've been performing a role for years, that quiet is one of the most disorienting things they've ever experienced. Because you don't know what to do with yourself now. Not in a practical sense. There are always things you do, but in a deeper sense. You don't know who is doing the doing. You don't know who gets up in the morning. You don't know what the organizing principle of your days is supposed to be now, that the role isn't providing it. And two responses emerge. I see them in almost every man who goes through this. And I've been through both of them. The first response is to collapse inward, to go quiet, to withdraw from people and situations and obligations that aren't absolutely necessary. The light in the eyes dims a little. The plans stop being made. There is a kind of suspension, like the whole operating system has frozen and nothing can process. From outside, it looks like depression. Sometimes it is depression, clinically, but sometimes it's something slightly different. It is the absence of an operating identity. Without the role that was organizing the self doesn't know how to operate. and the non operation looks like a collapse. The second response is immediately fill the space. They grab the first available identity and install it. New job, new project, new relationship, new persona. Get busy immediately. Make some noise. Build something, anything, but quickly. So that the terrifying question, who are you within all of this, doesn't have time to land. And from outside, this looks like resilience, looks like moving on, looks like not letting things break you. But what it actually is, most of the time, is avoidance. High functioning avoidance. Impressive looking avoidance, but avoidance. Because the question didn't get answered, it got drowned out. And the new structure, the new job, the new project, the new version of business is built on the same foundation, the same unexamined self concept, the same borrowed identity, which means it's subject to the same vulnerabilities. And eventually, sometimes years later, something cracks it again, and the question comes back, louder now, because it's been waiting longer. The only real answer to the role disappearing is to stay, to not run, to not immediately fill the space, to sit in the uncomfortable, disorienting, directionless space long enough to actually meet yourself there. I know that sounds abstract. I know just sit with the discomfort is advice that's easy and genuinely hard to follow. So I want to be more specific about what that actually looks like. That's the next chapter. I want to talk about the in between as a specific place, not as a metaphor, as a place you actually live in for a period of your life, with specific characteristics, specific dangers, and specific things it requires from you. The in between is the period between the old identity and the new one, between who you were and who you are becoming, between the structure that dissolved and the structure that hasn't built yet. And what makes it dangerous isn't the discomfort. Although the discomfort is real and is significant, what makes it dangerous is that it has a specific set of traps that men fall into while they're in there. And I want to name every one of them because if you know they are there, you have a fighting chance of not stepping into them. Trap one, the false resolution. This is when you attach to the first thing that gives you a clear identity again, even if it's a wrong thing. A job that isn't right, a relationship that isn't right, a version of yourself that just the old identity with a new paid job. The in between is so uncomfortable that the pressure to end it, to have an answer to who am I, becomes enormous. And the brain will accept a bad answer over a no answer every time because uncertainty is more threatening than a wrong certainty. I've done this. I have grabbed for the nearest available identity just to have something to hold on. And the cost of that, the cost of installing a false resolution, is that you skip the real work. The new structure gets built on the same shaky foundation. And the in between comes back usually harder, usually longer, because the unfinished business compounded. Trap 2, the permanent address. The opposite of the false resolution, instead of grabbing for the first answer, some men just stay in the in between and they stay there indefinitely. They get used to it. It becomes its own kind of identity. The man in transition, the man still figuring it out, the man in the middle of his journey. And this is subtle because on the surface, it looks like self awareness, it looks like patience with the process, it looks like not rushing into the wrong answer. But there is a version of staying in the in between that is avoidance dressed as process. There is a version where I'm still figuring out who I am becomes a permanent state rather than a temporary one, where the uncertainty becomes comfortable in its own way, where the searching replaces the finding, because finding would require committing, and committing would require risking being wrong. If you have been figuring yourself out for more than 2 years and nothing has shifted, that's not a long process. That's a permanent address. And it needs to be named as such. Trap 3: permanent decisions from temporary pain. This is the one that costs men the most. Irreversible decisions made from the inside, most destabilized periods of their lives, burning bridges with people, with opportunities, with parts of their own history, because the pain of in between makes everything feel urgent, makes clean breaks feel necessary, makes walking away from things feel like strength. Sometimes walking away is strength. Sometimes the bridge needs to be burned. But sometimes, sitting on the other side of it years later, you can clearly see that you made a permanent decision from a temporary state of mind, that you ended something that had more value than you could see from the inside the pain, that you threw away something real because you couldn't see it clearly through the distortion. I'm not saying stay in the bad situations. I'm saying the in between is not the right time to make a major, irreversible decision. If you can possibly avoid it, you should. Because the in between distorts your perception in specific ways. It makes the past seem worse than it was, makes the future seem clearer than it is. Both distortions lead to bad permanent decisions. Trap 4: numbing the discomfort instead of sitting with it. This one is the most common and the least dramatic looking, which is why it's so effective at going unnoticed. The discomfort of the in between is real. It's a genuine, sustained daily discomfort. And the human impulse is to reduce it, not through the hard work of actually moving through it, but through short term reduction. Screens, noise, alcohol, or other substances sometimes. Constant distraction. Anything that fills the space and muffles the question. And it works. In the short term, it does. The discomfort reduces. The question goes quiet. The evening passes without the crisis. But the question doesn't go away. It waits. And it accumulates interest. The longer you avoid it, the more charged it gets. The more it requires to be answered when it finally can't be avoided anymore. The in between has a specific requirement, one thing. And if you don't give it this thing, you stay there. You might not feel like you're staying there, but you might feel like you're moving, building, living your life. But underneath, at the level of the unanswered questions, you're still there. The requirement is this: willingness to stay in the discomfort long enough to let something real emerge. Not forever, not passively, but long enough. deliberately enough, with enough honest and enough stillness that what's actually there under the rules, under the noise, under the borrowed identity can surface. That's what the in between asks of you. Most men never give it. The ones who do, who sit in the discomfort honestly, who don't grab the false resolutions, who don't numb their way through, those are the men who come out of their side with something real, something that's actually theirs, something that holds. I'm going to tell you about my version of this. And I want to be clear about why I'm telling you. I'm telling you not for sympathy, not to perform vulnerability, not to make this more relatable in some calculated way. I am telling you because I have found in everything I put out on this channel that the specific story is more useful than the general principle. When someone describes the exact texture of an experience, it helps you recognize it in your own life in a way that abstracts concepts don't. So here's the specific texture of mine. There was a period in my life, not a short one, where I genuinely did not know who I was, not in the dramatic existential crisis on the floor way, more in the way I described earlier, a seeping in, a gradual becoming a stranger to yourself that happens so slowly you almost don't notice until you go deep inside it. The things I had built my sense of self around, the roles I was playing, the identity I was performing had shifted or dissolved. Some of it was taken from me by circumstances. Some of it I walked away from. Some of it just stopped fitting. And I hadn't replaced it with anything. And what I remember most about that period, the thing that's hardest to describe accurately is the silence. Not peaceful silence, not the good kind of quiet where you feel settled. The silence of a room where furniture used to be. The specific quality of absence that you feel, not because nothing is there, but because something that was always there isn't anymore. I remember sitting in a room by myself, evening, no particular reason for the moment to be significant, and just feeling that absence. And for the first time in a long time, maybe the first time ever, actually letting myself feel it instead of immediately reaching for something to fill it. And in that space, I tried to answer the questions, the real version. Not what are you working on or what are you building towards. Those questions I had answers to, or at least plausible sounding answers. The real question: who are you, Rajat? Who is the person that exists here in this room with nobody watching and nothing to perform? And what I found honestly, and this is uncomfortable to say out loud, not much, or more precisely, not much that felt genuinely mine. There was a lot. There was history. There were experiences. There were things I'd like to build and survived and learn. But when I tried to find the thing underneath all of it, the core of it, the thing that was me, independent of the circumstances and the roles and the stories I've been telling, it was quieter than I expected. And then I did what I described earlier. I ran. I got busy. I built things, started things, told myself I was moving when a lot of things were not. I was just keeping the silence away. That worked for a while, in the way that avoidance always works for a while. And then it stopped working. The way avoidance always stops working. And I ended up back in that room. back with that silence, back with that question. This time I didn't run. I sat with it properly for longer than was comfortable. And what started to come up slowly, quietly, like something surfacing from deep water, was the actual answer. Not a complete answer, not a polished one, but a real one. Some things that I'd always thought were genuinely mine turned out to be inherited. I had borrowed my definition of success from somewhere. I had borrowed my idea of what a man should look like at this age was borrowed from somewhere. I had been performing a version of ambition that was partly genuinely mine and partly assembled from what I thought was expected. And underneath all of that, there were things, small things, a way of thinking that was actually how I thought when I wasn't performing. Set of values that had actually held my whole life, even when they weren't convenient, even when they cost me something. A sense of what I actually wanted my life to feel like, not look like from the outside, from the inside, feeling it. That had nothing to do with what was impressive. Those small, quiet things, that was what was actually mine. And I started building from there, not from the polished story, not from what looked good, from those quiet, honest things. I'm still building every single day. Some days I feel the progress clearly. Some days I feel like I'm back at the beginning. Some days old patterns resurface, the borrowed identity, the performance, the noise to keep the silence away. But the direction is clear. It is set in a way it wasn't before. And there's a different quality to the building now because I know with more certainty than I've ever had before who is doing the building. That's the thing. That's the whole thing. Not certainty about the outcome, not certainty about the path, certainty about who is walking it. Okay, let me give you the actual definition, not the philosophical one, the practical one, the one that's useful for actually building it. Identity is not what you do, it's not your job, your title, your achievements, your relationships, your history. Identity is the consistent pattern of how you choose, especially under pressure, what you move toward and what you refuse, what you protect and what you're willing to lose, how you show up when nobody's watching and there's nothing to gain. That's it. That's the whole definition. And here's why this definition matters more than any other version. Because if identity is your choices, your pattern of behavior over time, then it's not fixed. It's not something you discovered once and either have it or don't have it. It's something you're building every single day, with every decision, with every moment of pressure, with every time you act in alignment with your values or drift away from them. Every choice is an identity statement. Every kept commitment is a deposit. Every time you act like a person you're trying to become, but even when it's inconvenient, even when nobody's watching, even when the easier path is the right one, it's in front of you, you build the identity. And every time you drift, every time you take the easy path that isn't consistent with your values, every time you make the choices that keep you comfortable rather than the choice that builds the person you're trying to be, You erode it, not destroy it, erode it. One decision doesn't make or break any identity, the pattern makes it. Now, I said earlier that most people think identity is something you discover, some true self waiting to be uncovered if you just look hard enough. I don't believe that, and I want to be honest about it. Why? Because a true self waiting to be discovered idea, while it sounds beautiful, can become a justification for inaction. You spend years searching for the authentic self rather than building it. You wait to feel like yourself rather than choosing to act like yourself. You treat identity as a destination you arrive at rather than a practice you engage in. Identity is built, not found, and the building material is your choices, specifically choices made in alignment with the values you actually hold, not the ones you think you should hold, not the ones that you look good, the ones that are genuinely yours. That's what the rebuilding process is. Finding the genuine values, the ones that were there even when nothing else was there, and then building a pattern of choices that's consistent with them. One choice at a time, one day at a time, compounded over months and years into something that eventually becomes undeniable. That's identity. That's how it's built. And that's how it's rebuilt. Let me make this practical because everything I've described so far is meaningless if it doesn't connect to something you can actually do. Four steps, not a program, a process. You don't do this in a weekend, you do it over time, but you start today. Step one, strip it back. Get a piece of paper, not your phone, paper, and write down every label, every role, every description you currently use when you answer the question, who are you? Don't edit it. Just write it what you actually say to other people, to yourself. Provider, father, businessman, someone who's been through some things, someone who's building back. Whatever you actually list is. Now look at each item on that list. And for each one, ask two questions. Question one, if this role or label was taken from me tomorrow through no choice of my own, would I still know who I am? Or would I lose my sense of self along with it? Question two, did I choose this identity deliberately or did it get assigned to me by circumstances, by other people, by what was expected? And have I ever actually examined whether it's genuinely mine? You're not trying to disregard these things, you're trying to see them clearly, to know which ones are genuinely yours and which ones you've been performing so long you forgot that they are a performance. That clarity, even just having the clarity, changes your relationship with your identity. It makes it less fragile because you know which things are the core. Step two, find the constants. This one takes more time. You're going back through your life, not to the highlights, not to the achievements, looking for moments where you felt most like yourself across different jobs, different relationships, different phases and contexts and versions of your life. Looking for the moments where you felt, this is me. This is what I am made of. This is how I am supposed to be moving through the world. What was happening in those moments? Not what were the circumstances, what were you doing, what was being expressed, what quality in you was active. Those things. The things that show up constantly across vastly different contexts, those are the constants. The things that were true of you at 22 and 35 and 45. The things that persist regardless of what your role you are playing. Those constants are the seeds of your actual identity, not the ones you built for the world, the ones that were there before the world's opinion of you mattered. Write them down. Be specific. Not I'm a hard worker. That's a description of behavior, not a value. What is the thing underneath? What does it say about what you care about? What does it protect? Step 3. Define 3 non negotiables. Not goals, not aspirations, values. Things that are non negotiable for you. Things that, if violated, make you feel like you've been betrayed something fundamental. Not the values you think you should have, not the virtuous sounding ones you'll be proud of to announce. The ones you actually have, the ones you've demonstrated often. With no audience, you've demonstrated them. The ones you've demonstrated, often quietly, often with no audience, your whole life. 3, not 10, not 5, 3. Because 3 is what you can actually hold. 3 is what you can return to in a moment of pressure and use as a compass. 10 values is a list, 3 values is a compass. Write them. Put them somewhere you see them every day, not as motivation, as orientation. Every decision, every choice, every time you're trying to figure out the right move, run it against those 3. If it's consistent with them, it's yours. If it isn't, it's borrowed or it's fear. Either way, you should know. Step 4. Act before you feel ready. This is the one most people skip because it feels wrong. It feels like you should know who you are before you start acting like it. It's backwards. You have to act your way into the identity. You have to make the choices before the identity feels fully formed. Because it feels true. Because you feel like the person you're building. And it will feel slightly false at first, like a performance, like you're pretending to be someone you haven't earned yet. Stay with it. Because the feeling of falseness comes from the gap between who you've been and who you're building. The only thing that closes the gap is evidence, behavioral evidence. The accumulation of choices made in alignment with your values over time until the new identity stops feeling like a performance and starts feeling like recognition. Find one behavior, one specific concrete daily behavior that is consistent with the person you're building. Not a transformation, not a program. One thing. Do it tomorrow, then the day after, then the day after that. Let the evidence accumulate. Trust the process. The man you have been, the one built from other people's expectations, from roles that were assigned rather than chosen, from a borrowed version of what success and manhood are supposed to look like. That man did something important. He got you here. He survived what needed surviving. He built what needed building. But he is not who you are capable of being. And I think somewhere underneath the performance, underneath the noise, in those quiet moments when nobody's watching, you have known that for a while. The man you're becoming, the one built from your actual values, moves towards something that actually matters to you, makes choices that are genuinely yours. He's not finished, he's not fully formed, he's in construction. And construction is uncomfortable, it's slow, it doesn't look impressive from the outside, most of the time. It doesn't have a clean narrative. It doesn't make a great highlight reel, but it is the most important work you will ever do. Because everything else, the achievements, the relationships, the life you're trying to build, it all rests on the foundation of who you actually are. Get the foundation right. Everything else becomes possible. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me, what role have you been hiding behind? You don't need to explain it. You don't need to write a paragraph. Just name it. Putting a name to it in public is the first act of seeing it clearly. Subscribe if this is the conversations you want more of every week. No performance, no highlight reel, just the real work. See you next time.